So today we're going to make cordage out of stinging nettle. This is just their common variety of stinging nettle we have here. And if you're not familiar with it, it has very, very tiny little hairs called trichomes that are like hypodermic needles, very, very small. And that's the stinging sensation that you get. So wearing gloves, if you don't have gloves, you can do like big leaf maples or dock leaves that work really great for being able to wrap around the plant and pull it out. And so basically what we're going to do is we're going to find our stinging nettles. It's better to do this in early summer because they start becoming woody later on the season. It's harder to get fiber from them, but you still can. So we're going to go down and cut the base. Now the longest fiber you're going to get out of this is how long you cut it. So if you're trying to make long cordage, you want long stinging nettles. And the easiest thing to do is just run your hand down it, get those leaves off, because the leaves have a lot of those little trichomes on them. And once you have it like this, wrap your hand around it, pull it through your hand, and it's going to knock all those trichomes off. And now you can touch this with bare hands with no problem. Okay, so we're cutting low to the base, and we're looking for the larger, longer stinging nettles, because those are going to give us the longer pieces of fiber. And the longer the fibers are, the easier it is to make your cordage. And one of the other things you want to look for is with these stinging nettles is that some of them will be branched. Most of them grow on a single long stalk, but if it's branched, then that interrupts those fibers, and that's a very difficult one to get fiber from. So we're looking for these big long ones like this one here. So this here, you can see those small translucent hairs that are on the stems and under the leaves. Those are those trichomes, as well as the flowers of stinging nettle. Okay, so now we're going to get ready to actually process it. And the first thing we're going to do is lay it out, make sure there aren't any branches coming off of it. All these are pretty straight. And we're going to start by taking the heel of our knife, blade of our knife, and squishing just lightly each of the leaf nodes, each of these little segments on here. And once we have that done, we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so each of these nodes here was where a leaf was at one point. And if you notice, the stalks are pretty square. So what you want to do is lay it down on one of the flat sides, and you want to just gently break down those nodes. You don't have to do too much. And what you're trying to do is you're going to try and get this to split. So you can see I got a split started, and then I'm just going to work down, and the nodes can be a little difficult to get through, but you're going to work your way down the whole thing. And what you're trying to wind up with is basically it split open in one continuous piece. And you'll notice as it goes down, it'll want to follow the fibers. And if you get to a point where you're stuck, so you just come back and you gently break it up. Now, some people will actually take a stick or a rock and they'll actually pound the whole thing down. I tend not to do that because I find it's easier to get the pith off of the actual fiber when it hasn't all been smashed like that. But we'll work our way all the way down, and the reality is, as this gets thinner and thinner, it's going to be harder and harder to get usable fiber out of it, but you want to go as far as you can. So I can't get much more than that. So what we're going to do is just cut it off there. Okay, so now for this next part, we have to separate the fiber, which is on the outer side, from the pithy center. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so this here is the pithy vasculature that we need to remove from the fiber. So easiest way to do that is to go towards the end and just bend it. And what you're hearing break is the pith. Once it breaks like that, you can just bend it over and you can peel that pithy part off. And what you have underneath is actually the fiber. So here we still have some pith on it, and that's okay, we'll remove that later. But an easy way to do this, and the way I recommend doing it, is you go to either end. We're gonna start with the small end this time, and all you're gonna do is every ½ inch to inch, you're gonna just roll it over. And what that does is it breaks the pith in lots of small places. You'll see some techniques, they won't do this because they want to pull the pith off in big pieces, but later on I'll show you why that might not be the best idea. Now on older stems, or stems that are picked later in the season, they start losing some of their flexibility and they start hardening. And if you ever find stinging nettle stems that are left over from the year before, you'll know they're very dry and brittle and they just snap. So if it does get to the point where it gets too woody, you just want to cut that off and use the greener material. Okay, so now it's all broken up and we're going to get a nice area to start with. And ideally you want to do all of it at once. So basically it's breaking into 4 strands. To start with, you want to do those together. If you do them one by one, that's fine, but it's easier if you keep them together, and you're less likely to lose some of your fiber material that way. So as we go down, we're just lifting that pithy part off, and you'll see each time we reach a point where that material has been broken, we have a nice, clean, fresh area to start with. Okay, so the reason I always break it up into smaller pieces is if you have a long, unbroken piece of pith and you start pulling, as you start pulling this fiber off, some of the fibers get adhered. So that fiber is still stuck on there. So if I pull, I'm losing that fiber. If I keep going, I start losing other fibers. But if you break it up, break right here, break there, break there, those fibers remain intact. And at the most, if I pull this piece of pith off, I might only pull a little bit of my fiber off with it, but I'm not going to ruin a whole long run of fiber. And we can see where we started with this one, it's kind of all over the place. It's a little kind of broke up. See, there's an example of where it catches on a fiber, and that fiber is going to want to run all the way down. So you just go back to a broken piece of pith and keep working your way back. So there's another example. So instead of losing a big long strand of fiber, at the most, I'm only losing an inch or so. All right, get further down here, you'll see where everything's kind of come back together again. We have this nice belt. And this is just really easy to just get your thumb underneath that pith and just kind of lift and fold. And that'll help maintain big long strands of fiber that you can use. Now another interesting thing to see is here, this is where, when the stem was whole, those are the nodes for the leaves. So when you go to actually pull these off, this is an area that's easy to get stuck on. And it's easy to snag the fiber on it and pull off and kind of rip it. So that's an area you want to pay attention to. The other thing is, we've now pulled that off, and those have created little holes. So when we go to break this down into smaller strands, you need to know that that area is going to be weaker than the area between the nodes. And longer fibers are always nicer to work with, but just because a fiber breaks halfway down doesn't mean it's not usable. So don't just throw it away or get frustrated and start over. I'm just going to do this all the way down to the end. All right, you can. We've got most of that off. We can just go through and we can find the small pieces we missed. So here's an example. There's just a little bit on there. It's very easy to get off. You want to go down and you want to remove those. Well, it's still nice and flexible and easy to do so. Sometimes what you'll run into is areas like where we first started, where there's this long piece of fibrous pith in there. And with that one, you can just kind of work underneath it and pull it off. And you can work again uphill, downhill, whatever gives you the most fiber. So for example, if I'm starting to pull down and starting to tear a fiber down this way, I want to stop, come down here and work my way up instead. So here's an example where this fiber wants to tear up. So instead of working up, I'll work down towards it. Okay, and where we are right now with this is usable. For example, if you injured your finger and it's bleeding, you know, you could take a little bit of yarrow or something of that, you know, plant like that. You can put it on that wound. Then you can take this and you can literally just wrap it right around. And as it is right now, it's strong enough, just in this flat belt shape, to hold enough pressure to stop bleeding on a finger easily. If you were in a hurry and just need to quickly bind something, you take this and just kind of give a few little twists in it, and you're ready to tie things.
Nice.
Okay? So keeping in mind what it is you're trying to do with it, it's really easy to kind of over process and make more work for yourself. So if you're just quick, doesn't need to be perfect, it's okay if it's uneven, you know, this is a great stage right here. You know, you can do a lot with this. But if you're trying to do something like make cordage that, you know, you're going to use for other projects, then you're at the point where you need to start kind of breaking this fiber down into more strands. So we already have a natural break here. So we're just going to follow that breakdown. And as we go down, we're going to hit those nodes, and that's where we're hitting right now. And with those nodes, if I pull too hard, what will happen is this fiber will tear here, and my strand will get really small really quick. So instead, when you get down to that node, right where it meets, you can take your thumbnail and just kind of clip right through that node, and that'll help you keep more even strands. Now the temptation is to just, and when you do that, you know, this one came out pretty okay, but I want to show you, we went from being this wide here to that narrow there to wide again to narrow again. So for simple cordage, that's probably fine. But if I needed to make something finer for like maybe a fishing line or a leader for a fishing line, then you need to make these even as much as you can, and you want to get them as small as you can. So in this right here, we have those two nodes, and as I'm coming down, I don't want to go through a node, I want to go between them. So I'm going to get right there between them, because remember, that makes it weaker. Now these fibers still have a lot of green material on them. And again, this goes back to what you're trying to do with it. Is, you know, it might be fine to leave that material on there. Or if you want something that's going to be a little finer, a little easier to work with, then what you can do is scrape this. And there's lots of different ways to do it. So in this case, I'm just going to use my thumbnail. I'm going to pinch down on it, not so hard that I'm going to break it, but enough that my thumbnail catches and can pull some of that excess material off of it.
Nice.
Now the other thing you need to look for are, again, those nodes. So this is a rise. You can run your finger down it. You can feel how much higher that is right there. And so what you can do is, again, with your thumb, just gently drag it across, and those nodes will actually come off. So in that case, you can see that's the node, came right off. So now this is equal thickness here. I can run my thumb down it and get even more of that green material off. And you can see here, I ripped some of it and it's separating. So you can see how fine those fibers get. So in this case, I'm gonna pull those little fibers. When you get these nice thin long ones, those are nice to set aside, because this is what you want to tie really fine things with. So this bigger stuff is nice for just regular cordage, where you might be using it to lash poles together. But you're going to go down, you're going to break each of these strands into the size that you need for your project. And if it's just general utility cordage, and it doesn't matter if it's thick, these are great sizes. So let's get this process down. When they're big like that, it's easy to pull them apart because they want to follow those natural breaks that are already in it. So I think we'll just leave these ones this way right here, and we're going to set them out to dry. So now we have our cordage broken down into the width we want, and the lengths. So what we're going to do is we're just going to hang it out to dry. And if you're in a really dry, hot place, the direct sunlight's probably not the best place to dry it. But if you dry it too much, you can always dampen it to work with it. So in this case, it is fairly hot out today, and this will only need to be in the sun for maybe an hour. That's all you got to do for now. This is fiber from earlier that's been drying for just over an hour now, and you can see how much more brittle it is. Now this is actually what we want. This is what's going to give the cordage strength. And you can see these ones are a little smaller, a little finer than the ones we did earlier, because we want these for smaller cordage. But you can get these incredibly fine. So here's a couple examples that are much thicker than a hair. And they're very strong already. But all it is a matter of just kind of continuously scraping down until you get those finer and finer fibers. In these cases, these really thin ones we're going to use for tying a fishing leader. So once we have that, you're going to want to pick a few pieces depending on the width of the cordage you want to make. So in this case, let's do two. We'll do 4 of these, and these ones are all about the same length. We'll do 1, 2. We're gonna start with 3 on this one. Okay. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna find the halfway point on there. So now our legs are kind of even. What we want to do is we want to make one leg slightly longer. And the reason is that that'll make it easier to add line as we go. So now we have our pieces, one leg's longer than the other. And we're going to take our low point right here, and we're going to start twisting. And what's going to happen as we twist, it's going to form a bite. And we have our little bite right here. Okay. Now let's zoom in for this one, because this is where a lot of people have a hard time with this, including myself. I have my bite now. What I want to do is clamp it here. And this side here, keep them separated. This side here, I'm going to give it a few twists. So I'm twisting to the right, okay? But I'm going to switch it to the left. Okay, so this is the twisted side. Now I'm going to kind of pinch up a little more, hold that part I just folded over. I'm going to give it a couple twists. And I'm going to go left. So if you can keep in your head, it's twist right, slide left. Twist right, slide left. Each time I'm moving down the line as I go. Twist right, slide left. Twist right, slide left. Right, left. And as you do this, it gets easier and easier to do it. And you can actually start doing things like twisting both strands at the same time and then sliding. But if you want it to really lock down, so you see how loose that one is?
Mm-hmm.
If you want it to really lock down, you just twist the one side, slide left.
What are the advantages of twisting both at once?
Well, you have one part is under tension,
Mm-hmm.
and the other part is not. So those twists are now fighting against the untwisted ones to try and force them to twist.
Okay.
But if
they're both twisted, is there less conflict and friction?
well, if they're both twisted the same direction, then they want to unspool the same direction.
Mm.
So, and let's see if we can get in on some of this. So this is another thing that can happen. My bite up top, I didn't have it tight enough. And so now we have that little gap in there. So we can either leave it, or we can just unroll it as far back as wherever the problem area is, and start again. So again, you're starting with that big series of twists, and see, this is really what you want in there. You want that to really bite down, and that'll stop it from untwisting. So we're back where we started again. So we're gonna twist right, slide left. And if you do it loose, it's going to be loose in here. If you do it tight, really cinch down on it, then you're going to get a much finer cordage. But for a lot of applications, that's not necessary. It can be hard to keep your lines separated here, so twist right, slide left. Twist right, slide left. Twist right, slide left. And you're going to keep doing that down the line. Now this is a time-consuming process, so it's probably not the best idea to do this while, you know, sitting trying to catch a fish, because you're not going to get a fish doing this. All your attention is going to be focused on trying to maintain tension. So this is something you gather the fiber while you're out foraging, and then you dry it during the day, and then when you're sitting around your fire at night, this is what you're doing. The truth is, once you've done this, you know, even for 10-15 minutes, you don't need any light to do it. You can do it all by feel. Okay, and you can feel your cordage, the quality of that cordage as it's moving through your hand while you're twisting and sliding. twist, slide.
After it's twisted and corded, how flexible is the rope?
So there's a lot of different things you can do with it. Again, it depends on the application. So if you're working with this like it is now, this stuff is pretty dry because it is hot out. But if it's too dry, then you can just dampen it.
Oh.
Because it'll take water back on. Now, you can actually do this without drying it. The difference is that this is already shrunk from drying, which means that when my cord is done, it's not going to shrink more. So if you do this with green fiber, so it's, and again, this still has quite a bit of non-fiber material on it. But if you do it when it's really wet, then it will shrink, and it can cause a couple of problems for you. So one thing is, you know, this line like this is fine, but if it shrank, it might kink it, or it might actually clamp down and create an area of weakness. So if it's something like you're doing a hasty shelter, use green cord, because it's not really going to matter that much. But if you're doing something like trying to make a fishing line, or you know, something you're going to use for your baskets, then, you know, or a trap, you really want to make sure that you've dried it ahead of time. Okay, so one of the things that makes this easier to do is, you know, you have your end you started with. Once you get a little bit, maybe an inch or so, 2 inches, you can open up that bite, and you can slip it over a branch or something. Now you can work this way, and this way is so much easier to work. So you can do your twist, slide, twist, slide. There's the other thing is, if you haven't done a lot of this, your hands will start to cramp pretty easily. So one of the things you want to make is a clothespin. So this is just a little cedar stick, partially split. And what you can do with this is, when you need to stop, you can just slide it right over it, and it's going to hold your two ends, and it's not going to unravel on you. So you can just leave it like that, take a break, come back to it.
Nice.
So keep that in mind. Now, something that can happen is, especially when it's dry and it's still got a lot of green material on it, is that it can be a little stiff to work with. So one of the things you can do is you can take your fibers, and you can dry them for several days and then dampen them if you want. But, you know, here's some of my fibers. One of the things I can do is I can just kind of just fold them back on themselves, and, you know, do this a little bit, and maybe do a little roll, you know, pull them apart, do it a few times. And what you're doing is you're loosening up the smaller fibers. So you're making it a little bit more supple to work with. So if you run into that, especially when you're doing finer stuff, it can be really nice to do that. Now, one of the things that happens when you're doing this, so, you know, I'm taking my break, I come back, and I'm ready to go again. But what I discover is, you know, suddenly this strand is thicker than this strand. And if I go like this, then it's going to be uneven. So you can always, at any point, slide stands. You can add from one side to the other, take away, whatever it is you need to do to keep them even. You can do that. Keep it balanced. It's all even now, and you can keep going. So keep that in mind when you're doing this. So, for example, I have two tiny, or actually one big and one tiny there. I have two thin and one medium over here. So got it at my even, go back and just get right back into it. And when we get down towards the end of this strand, I'll show you how to add it in. Okay, so you can see we're getting towards the end, and I have a short side and a longer side. And that's one of the reasons you don't want both these to end at the same point. So now we're gonna have to add strands to this because we're making a longer cord. So I've got my strands I want to add here. And what I'm going to do is line them up.
And start twisting them in.
And on my short side, I'm just going to lay them across. And you're going to notice they're going to stick out a little bit. And that's fine. But I'm going to leave them hanging out like that. And I'm just going to go right back to what I was doing. Now I'm just going to work them right in this part of it. Twist, slide, twist, slide, and you're going to notice that this is still sticking out here.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm coming towards the end of the other one, but I want to go a little further. Twist, slide, twist, slide, and we're just going to keep doing that. And this extra part here that's sticking out, when we're done, we're just going to come by and we're just going to cut it.
Okay.
And that's how you add in line. Feet worth here. To end it, you just put a simple overhand knot in it, and it'll stop it from unraveling on itself. And now we can go through and clean it up. So you have those tails from when we added in more pieces. And so it's just as simple as cutting them off with a knife. And then for the fine material, if you need it to be cleaner, then it's as simple as just running it through a flame gently, and those little tiny fibers will just burn right off.
Nice.
So what can you do with it? You can do a lot with it, right? You can use it for binding things. You make a bunch of it and you put it in a spool, and you'll always have it with you for whatever you need to do. Now this one, we started with 6 strands and we tapered it down to where we're only working with 2 strands. So it gets really thin down towards the bottom. And we did this intentionally so that we can use this for fishing, but you can do all sorts of things. If you really wanted, you can make a series of these and then use these to braid them together and have an even stronger binding material. That's our fiber cord. Okay, so we're doing stinging nettle cordage today, but I mean, if you look around, we're surrounded by materials that would work. So all of the English black ivy that is just invasive, great cordage material. Here's the native blackberry or dewberry, has a bunch of small thorns, but again, same process. You strip those off, great cordage. Stinging nettle, big leaf maple is easy to peel long strips of the bark off, as well as cedars. So there's a lot of opportunity to make different types of cordage here. And you know, going out and not being able to find a stinger nettle doesn't mean you can't make cordage. So use the lessons from how to make it out of stinging nettle and see how you can apply it to the other materials that are around you. That way, again, you have more than one tool in your toolbox.